the doom that we felt and how that was transformed. I know we didn't go all the way, but there are many reasons why. But the fact that we did, and that each person actually walked out there and cast their vote, whoever found the courage to do it, there were many of those.
Few months ago, a vote that was really for our constitution, a vote that feared us losing our constitution. I don't believe this constitution is a book or a document. It is more a constantly live narration of how our lives ought to be. The power that that narration holds is what I believe drove people to their polling stations. The Constitution is our source of hope and aspirations as a people. And now we have been witness to how we can transform ourselves from mere spectators to active citizens to safeguard our Constitution and our democracy. And that possibility and that power of the vote has brought our role, we the people, front and center. There is no going back and sitting in the wings or on the sidelines. That time is over. This democracy cannot run without its people in this challenging hour, especially in this challenging hour. This role involves us recasting our relationship with the government, its governance and accountability, and not to be fearful of its governance and accountability. With the opposition holding this government accountable, and with the straying democratic institutions that have been already discussed so well before me, that have strayed so far that they are front and center in undoing this democracy brick by brick, and they are still functioning. All this in our name. Don't forget, this is not a government we elect and we put out there and then it has to run its course. All that is done every day, every hour is done in our name. It is the people of this country that each action done out there by every accountable elected government is done in our name. And we should not forget that. We have actually. However, let me just have a sip of water. However, let's remember this victory was bittersweet. Sweet because we saw the power of people and their vote, and how our votes would create new circumstances. Circumstances that could reclaim our democracy. We saw that glimmer. We still see it every morning. The victory was bitter though, as we didn't quite get as far as we wanted to, and where we wanted to bring our democracy, and actually begin again. I think, some of us felt at least that remote glimmer while campaigning, that could be a possibility. And let's fight for it. Let's fight for the way we want things to be, because this India is not acceptable to us. Call it because of the most uneven playing field laid out by the Election Commission of India, or the hate and divisive politics that are still in play in large pockets of this country, or the self-interests of politicians and politics, and I'm talking about both sides of the idea, or the role of the so-called mainstream but propaganda media, dysfunctional, absolutely dysfunctional as the fourth pillar of democracy. Let's recognize that this is also in our name. So, where do we go from here? We voted, we were victorious, but still have a way to go. We have a government that doesn't seem to care that the elections did reflect the people's mandate, and it's shrinking confidence, the people's shrinking confidence in the current dispensation. All that has been set aside, and we seem to be carrying on, or this government seems to be carrying on as it is business as usual, but it is not. I'd like to highlight three essentials, I believe, that take us forward on this path of reclaiming our democracy. 3. The power of the collective, the power of the narrative that gets each of us as citizens to connect with the essentials in our lives, and the power of the pushback on the unconstitutional actions of an undemocratic government. Those are the three. So let's begin with the first one, the power of the collective. I don't know about you, but we find ourselves, I feel, at a threshold. I believe the recent events have been instrumental in forming this threshold. Thresholds are about arrival, about transition, and even pause. The threshold of a doorway takes you from one situation to another, from outside to in, or the other way around. The question is, where have we arrived, and what kind of a transition is this? What kind of a transition do we want this to be? We are not at the mercy of anyone. This is we the people. This is our threshold that we formed, and we are here. For that, I think we need to take a few steps back to the road leading to this threshold. It has been one, I believe, like no other, a forging together of grassroots networks, organizations, and platforms. There has never been this kind of grassroots unity of purpose in independent India. Such was the force of hatred and divisive politics that it brought us all together. I'm part of one such platform of 112 grassroots organizations in Karnataka. Let me take you back to the 5th of March last year, when Ederu Karnataka, Wake Up Karnataka came into existence. Because these 112 organizations decided to set their differences aside with only one common goal, to defeat hate and divisive politics in this country. There was still 2 months left, I remember, till assembly elections, in Karnataka. we began work in 43 critical constituencies based on data, looking at the last three elections and so on and so forth, experience from the ground and so on. We got these 43 critical constituencies, which quickly mushroomed into 103. Local, diverse teams were formed on the ground in each critical constituency, figuring out how they were going to connect with their respective critical communities. Communities that we felt had the propensity to vote and vote secular. Anyway, cutting our long story short, out of the 103 constituencies we worked in, 76 went secular, which were part of bringing in a secular government. The experiment had worked. That experiment is about people like you. That experiment, we must never forget, is about we the people. This is not something that happens in isolation because some NGO is working in some remote part of this country. This is a story about all of us. India, Karnataka subsequently triggered an awakening and enthusiasm at a time when morale across the country was quite low, with the Lok Sabha elections looming. These grassroots networks wanted to know about, the grassroots networks in other states wanted to know about the Karnataka experiment. And we were most happy to share. What emerged was a network across 24 states that connected and supported each other right up to the Lok Sabha elections. Unity of purpose and focused strategic work on the ground. Connecting to people, to their deteriorating lives, but also to their precious vote. This work was spread out in over 150 critical constituencies across this country, with various teams in various states taking on the bit of learning from the Karnataka experiment, but making it their own. We all have this creativity, this agility to work in the context we all know so well. And this is one of only several stories of networks across the country that share that common purpose, like we all do. What for me was most stimulating and revealing was the almost rediscovery of the power of the vote. That vote has brought us to this far here. This victory, just like our democracy, I believe can only be kept alive with the people's voice. That people's voice emerged with that victory. It cannot be silenced again. Not ever again. And that is the power of the collective. That is the power that the collective holds. So how does the collective further build itself and connect across networks and platforms? As the core of building and reclaiming our democracy. I leave you with that question. And let's move on to the second essential. The power of the narrative that gets each of us as citizens to connect with the essentials in our lives. Looking ahead, we as grassroots networks, along with an active citizenry, need to strengthen our ability to further magnify the people's voice. Both within each state and collectively, we need to ensure we are molding our narrative from the narrative on pro-people issues that we were so successful in penetrating the ground during the elections. And we were. And let's not forget that. This is how people were aroused in terms of recognizing themselves and wanting to be counted in. A strong, well-grounded narrative can only strengthen our connectedness, our networks, and add an impetus to our focused action on the ground. We need that glue. What we've learned about narrative in this last election cycle is the need to bring out the people's fame. And it is so widespread, as we all know, and yet made invisible by the current dispensation. and connect that pain to the promise of action that it requires. A relationship, if you like, of the dard, the pain, and the dawa. When we talk about the mudda, instead of mandir, or the Mangal Sutra, instead of malnutrition, we need to actively connect to the pain, connect the pain to the promise of action. And that's what makes us an articulate, informed citizenry as well as a collective for change. It is not enough to talk about unemployment, for instance, but also to talk about the newly privatized PSU down the road that needs to be switched back to being a public unit. Price rise can never be countered with food rations when GST and subsidies on gas and high prices of fuel are not addressed. Let's not fool ourselves, and let's not allow a government to fool us. We are the people. We, the people, have a voice in this. And let's not forget it, because it is our forgetting that makes us mute and makes this democracy dysfunctional. The growth in this country cannot be measured on the vulgar expansion of prosperity of the few when the rest are lied to and ignored. What is this? Did you see in the papers the other day? Was it the World Bank or the IMF? Yeah. Have now, we're going to be 7% growth. What nonsense. It is absolutely nonsensical in a country like this, the way it is suffering, to think that the IMF has no sense of its own purpose in describing what this country is going through. Just economically. Forget about the rest. But economically, there is no equality, there is nothing going on in this country that is worth talking about a 7% growth rate. So what is our plan of action going forward, both as states and as a collective, to maintain the required momentum through our narratives and thereby magnifying and keeping alive the people's voice, our voice? That is the question we need to keep alive and keep responding to, because it is a changing ground on which we are functioning. And finally, the power of pushback on the unconstitutional actions of an undemocratic government. We find ourselves in a unique situation where a minority government doesn't seem to be behaving like one. This is a good time to remember the people's victory, the power of the vote, of each of our votes. The opposition hopefully will stay united and do its job in and outside Parliament. But what will we do? We the people. Let's not count ourselves out. We are a major player. Both the power of the collective and the power of the narrative can give us a strong base to stand on, but to march forward and push back, we need to show up and step up. Edelu, Karnataka, for instance, for this election, had 350 teams, 5,000 volunteers, with an additional 25,000 volunteers from various communities, active on the ground. These are all, mind you, people who count themselves as part of the active citizenry. This is not some recruitment drive by Edelu, Karnataka. This is about people again, you and me. This number still needs to grow, make no mistake, and grow across the country, across networks. If we as citizens don't show up, this democracy will not run itself. But it certainly will run itself into the ground without us. Ask yourself, would you be willing to walk the streets and demonstrate if this democracy depended on it? We're not used to this kind of stuff, but this is the moment to ask yourself that question. I'd like to conclude by saying, we as networks and platforms need to think radical collaboration. It is radical as it needs to an even higher level of unity on the ground. It's radical as it is selfless, without self-interest, committing to the broader collective. It is not every individual or network for themselves. It is for greater good for all to partake in our democracy and thrive by our constitution. That radical collaboration requires a collaborative intention that is a clear, tangible, collective goal, which we have of triumphing against hate and divisive politics. The second is a targeted ground preparation and cooperation which needs work as we are still fragmented, which can further connect and expand and strengthen us on the ground. It is more people and more connections that only can strengthen that. And thirdly, a collaborative support system that helps various networks across India consolidate. A support system that provides and fills gaps on data, research, and believe me, I know this. Given the kinds of networks that have arisen in this country, this is the kind of support that is required. Data, research, narrative building, legal support, networking, messaging, and so on. And fourthly, a commitment for building a collective momentum. A few islands of success are not going to create change and the pushback we need. No way. This needs, amongst grassroots networks, an openness and connectedness in strategy, action, and communication, talking to each other. There needs to be a self-accountability. We hold the government to account, but what about us? A self-accountability of being accountable to ourselves as networks and our peers, other networks. And thirdly, being adaptable and flexible to keep the ball rolling in the right direction. At an individual level, I believe every citizen that values this democracy of ours must step up to claim their part as an active citizen in reclaiming this democracy, nothing less. It is not enough to admire the freedom fighters etched in our minds, whom we revere. We have to be, today, we have to be the Sarojini Naidus, the Rani Lakshmibai, Kasturba, Annie Besant, Begum Hazrat Mahal, Aruna Asif Ali, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay. We have to be this. This is not to be nostalgic about another era. Ask yourself, what moves you about Maulana Azad, Bhagat Singh, Tipu Sultan, Mangal Pandey, and so on, Gandhi. You know, there is a long list. Hyder Ali. You know, there is Tilak. You know, there are so many. And you all know about them. Which one moves you and why? And how is that going to move you into action? There is no admiration without emanating what you love about them. Think about it. I do, though, welcome you to walk with us to broaden and deepen this march to piecing together a thriving democracy. I doubt there is any other way to get there. Thank you very much.